Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International. On tonight's headlines. Moscow announced today that a truck exploded, igniting a huge fire and damaging the key Kerch Bridge, built as Russia's sole land link with annexed Crimea, and vowed to find the perpetrators without immediately blaming Ukraine. Thailand's king and queen have met with grieving relatives at a hospital to extend their moral support to the injured and families of people, including children, murdered by a sacked policeman who rampaged through a nursery armed with a gun and knife the day before.
And slashing with a knife.
And global food commodity prices fell last month, although the cost of cereals rose, linked to uncertainty over how long Black Sea ports will continue to stay open. And Google is looking up to its smartphone game with the Pixel 7, the latest entrant in a competitive corner of personal electronics where it has traditionally been a bit player. Moscow announced today that a truck exploded, igniting a huge fire and damaging the key Kerch Bridge, built as Russia's sole land link with annexed Crimea, and vowed to find the perpetrators without immediately blaming Ukraine. Take a look. Now, Russia said the blast set ablaze 7 oil tankers by train and collapsed 2 car lanes of the giant road and rail structure. Dramatic social media footage showed the bridge on fire with parts plunging into the sea. The bridge, personally inaugurated by President Vladimir Putin in 2018, is a vital transport link for carrying military equipment to Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine. Moscow had maintained the bridge crossing was safe despite the fighting. The Kremlin spokesman said President Putin had ordered the commission to be set up to look into the blast. There have been several explosions at Russian military installations in the Crimean Peninsula, and if it's established that Ukraine was behind this latest blast, alarm bells may sound with the bridge so far from the front line. Now, the blast come after Ukraine's recent lightning territorial gains in the east and south that have undermined the Kremlin's claim that it annexed Donetsk, neighboring Lugansk, and the southern regions of Zaporizhia and Kherson. Russian forces said Friday they had captured, meanwhile, the ground in Donetsk and East Ukraine, their first claim of new gains since a Kiev counteroffensive rattled Moscow's war effort. And the Moscow-installed head of the Crimean Peninsula, Sergei Aksyonov, called on locals and tourists to keep calm following the explosion on the Kerch Bridge that set part of it on fire and caused 2 automobile lanes to collapse into the sea. Let's listen in.
Прошу всех крымчан соблюдать спокойствие, всех гостей Крыма в данном случае тоже прошу набраться терпения. Мы договорились, что первое, топливо в наличии больше, чем на месяц. У нас полностью никакого ажиотажа быть не должно. Продовольственные запасы больше, чем на 2 месяца практически по всем направлениям. Рисков в этой части никаких нет. Работы по восстановлению Крымского моста будут вестись без всякой бюрократии. Соответственно, приступаем практически сегодня, как только закончит работу Следственный комитет и Федеральная служба безопасности. Прошу всех крымчан.
In a video released on his social media, Aksyonov said that fuel and food supplies are sufficient. The Kremlin spokesman also said President Putin had ordered the establishment of a commission to look into the blast. The head of the Russian-installed regional parliament in Crimea, Vladimir Konstantinov, blamed it on Ukrainian vandals. According to BBC, it's the longest bridge in Europe. It was hailed by Russian media as the construction of the century. Russian officials previously claimed it was well protected from threats from air, land, and water. The bridges are vital links in Russia's supply chain, and without them, Moscow will find it even harder to send troops and equipment to repel Ukraine's offensive north of Kherson. At least 14 people died when 7 Russian missiles struck the industrial town of Zaporizhia in southern Ukraine, according to the town council's secretary, announcing it late Friday. The missiles struck before dawn on Thursday, with 3 landing in the town center, just 40 kilometers from the artillery battles of the southern front. Sad news keeps coming to us from the analysis of the buildings hit during the attack, according to Anatoly Kurtev via telegram. On Thursday, 7 Russian missiles struck the industrial city just 40 kilometers from the artillery battles of the southern front. 3 struck the downtown shortly after 5 a.m. A 5-story residential building on the main street was almost razed to the ground. President Volodymyr Zelensky lashed out on Telegram, saying Zaporizhia is subjected to massive rocket attacks every day. He said it's a deliberate crime. The Ukrainian-controlled city is located in the eponymous Zaporizhia region, also home to the Russian-occupied nuclear plant that has been the site of heavy shelling. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden said Thursday the world is facing nuclear Armageddon, warning that Vladimir Putin may use his atomic arsenal as Russian troops struggle against a Ukrainian counteroffensive. Take a look. He said, "We have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, President Biden said Thursday in New York, adding that we're trying to figure out what is Putin's off-ramp. After Russia's invasion 8 months ago, President Putin has made thinly veiled threats to use nuclear weapons if he feels he has run out of options in his bid to seize swaths of Ukrainian territory in the face of stiff resistance by Western-backed Kiev. While experts say any nuclear attacks would likely be relatively small, President Biden warned that even a tactical strike in a limited area would still risk triggering a wider conflagration." Now, asked about President Biden's assertion that the U.S. was trying to find an off-ramp for President Putin to de-escalate in his invasion of Ukraine before he resorts to weapons of mass destruction, here's what the White House said.
We have not seen any reason to adjust our own strategic nuclear posture, nor do we have indication that Russia is preparing to imminently use nuclear weapons. What you're seeing, the $600 million that we announced today of nuclear assistance, security assistance, is just a continued commitment that we have showed to Ukraine.
In tonight's other news, Thailand's king and queen have met with the grieving relatives at hospital to extend moral support to the injured and families of people, including children, murdered by a sacked policeman who rampaged through a nursery armed with a gun and knife the day before. Crystal Mapa reports.
Thailand's king and queen visited a hospital, treating those wounded in a gun and knife rampage by a sacked policeman that left 38 people dead, ending a day of grief and mourning by relatives. The king met survivors and relatives at a hospital in northeastern Nong Bua Lampu province late on Friday. To recall, the attacker forced his way into the child care center at about 12:30 p.m. on Thursday to begin his murderous spree, opening fire with his own legally owned 9mm pistol and slashing with a knife. Afterwards, the 34-year-old went home to murder his wife and son before taking his own life, ending the rampage at about 3 p.m. In total, he killed 24 children, 21 boys and 3 girls, and 12 adults. Most died from a combination of knife wounds and gunshots, according to police investigators. PM Prayut Chan-o-cha has ordered a swift probe into the massacre, and it has emerged that Panya, the gunman, was sacked from the police for drug abuse. Several people in the close-knit community have said that he was known in the area as a methamphetamine addict. Thailand's king has told bereaved families he shares their grief. In a rare public address, he said, "There are no words that can express the sorrow. I support you all and wish you to be strong." Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha joined the mourners on Friday, laying flowers and handing out compensation checks to grieving families. Some struggling to comprehend the atrocity wept inconsolably, clutching their children's favorite toys or blankets, and in one case, a half-full bottle of milk, standing there, looking at the center, looking at the place where their child was last alive, and asking why on earth would anybody do this? And that's a question everybody across Thailand is asking, as this entire nation feels the weight of this horrible tragedy. It has been very, very sad these past few days. Reporting from Bangkok, Thailand, this is Crystal Mapa. We live in extraordinary times.
Meanwhile, the deadly stampede at an Indonesian football stadium has shaken the foundations of the country's most popular sport and was the culmination of decades of mismanagement and violence. The tragedy a week ago that killed 131 people, including 32 children in the aftermath of the top-tier match, has forced officials and fans to confront failings in every aspect of the game in the country. First, let's listen in.
Saya juga telah perintahkan kepada Menpora, Kapolri, dan Ketua Umum PSSI untuk melakukan evaluasi menyeluruh tentang pelaksanaan pertandingan sepak bola dan juga prosedur pengamanan penyelenggaraannya.
Experts on Indonesian football speak of shaky infrastructure mismanagement, hours-long waits to leave outdated stadiums, and the potential for heated passions to descend into violence that has killed scores since the 1990s. Authorities said many stadiums in Indonesia have not met international standards for hosting sports events. Some do not have single seating, but instead benches that allow more people to stand and crowd together, while making it harder for security to spot a threatening incident before it happens. President Widodo said the seated Gelora Bung Karno Stadium in Jakarta allowed all spectators to exit safely within 15 minutes, and all stadiums should be brought in line. Persebaya Surabaya fans were barred from the stadium because of fear of fan violence led by diehard Ultra fans. But when Arema FC supporters, known as Arimania, flooded the pitch to express their anger with the home team, it set off a chain of events worsened by a violent police response that sparked a stampede, leaving many trampled or suffocated to death. Meanwhile, President Marcos Jr. today expressed sympathy for the victims of the deadly stampede in a football match in Indonesia and the mass killing at a day center in Thailand. Now, the president said the Filipino nation condoles and prays with the families of the victims. He said, "We condole deeply with the families of those lost in the recent tragedies of the Indonesia football stampede and the Thailand daycare attack," Marcos posted on Twitter. He also said, "We pray for the recovery of the survivors and the healing of those left behind." North Korea today defended its recent flurry of missile tests as a legitimate counter to U.S. military threats. The reclusive communist country has conducted 6 sanctions-busting launches in less than 2 weeks. The latest coming Thursday with the firing of a pair of ballistic missiles. On Tuesday, it fired an intermediate-range ballistic missile over Japan, and that prompted an alert for people in affected areas underneath to take cover. Now, the missile test launched by the DPRK is a regular and planned self-defensive step for defending the country's security and the regional peace from the U.S. direct military threats that have lasted for more than half a century, according to North Korea's Civil Aviation Agency, without specifying which launch, according to state-run news agency KCNA. Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington have ramped up joint military drills in recent weeks and carried out more exercises Thursday involving a U.S. Navy destroyer from the USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier strike group. The launches are part of a record year of weapons tests by isolated North Korea, which leader Kim Jong-un has declared an irreversible nuclear power, effectively ending the possibility of denuclearization talks. Meanwhile, a professor at a Kumkin University in Seoul said that North Korea is developing tactical nuclear weapons, which will give them an upper hand on the Korean peninsula. Take a look.
Right now, they are developing tactical nuclear weapons, which will give them an upper hand on the Korean peninsula. Obviously, their dream in the long run is to blackmail Americans into withdrawing from Korea and then use tactical nuclear weapons to force their will on the South. This is a dream, but, well, it's not completely impossible dream. Actually, they have come close to being able to destroy a significant part of the city of New York. But they now need something to deal with the South. And this is why they emphasize all this kind of short-range ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and the like. Because any resolutions, again, about additional sanctions are likely to be blocked by the Chinese and Russians. And also because, well, what else can you do? All conceivable sanctions have been implemented. So most likely will be a lot of tough talk, maybe some, American bombers flying around Korea. Yeah. North Koreans' final goal is sort of clear. They either want to have full-scale tactical and strategic nuclear weapons, or alternatively, they are going to talk with the Americans about sanctions being lifted in exchange for some reduction of...
Meanwhile, the United States imposed sanctions on firms and individuals in Marshall Islands, Singapore, and Taiwan, accused of helping Pyongyang procure fuel in violation of UN sanctions. The move follows an escalating series of missile tests by Pyongyang, including the provocative launch of an intermediate-range ballistic missile over Japan. The U.S. is sending a clear message that we will continue to take actions against those who support the development and sustainment of the DPRK's military and weapons arsenal, according to Secretary of State Antony Blinken in a statement, using the acronym for North Korea's official name. According to the U.S. Treasury Department, Marshall Islands-based New Eastern Shipping Company Limited owned a ship called the Courageous, which was also known as the Sea Prima, that illegally delivered refined petroleum to a North Korean ship off the country's southwestern coast. The delivery violates UN Security Council resolutions that prohibit ship-to-ship transfers with North Korean vessels and that cap the country's refined petroleum products or imports. Oil deliveries are crucial to North Korea's economy and its ballistic and nuclear weapons program. The Department of Energy is expecting a new round of oil price next week after 5 consecutive weeks of rollbacks in prices of diesel and kerosene. During the Laging Handa public briefing, DOE Director Rino Abad estimated that there will be an increase of less than 1 peso on gasoline prices, around 4 pesos on diesel, and more than 2 pesos increment on kerosene prices next week. Now this, as the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries and its allies announced to slash oil production by 2 million barrels per day, its biggest cut since the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. Take a look.
So ito'y napakalaki po kumpara doon sa nauna nilang ika nga ay testing noong October na 100,000 barrels lang. So ito'y inaasahan po natin na magpupos po nung reverse ng trend. Instead na rollback, may indikasyon po talaga tayo na mukhang magkakaroon ng increase next week. Oversupply ngayon as of August na mga report nila na nagre-range po yan ng within more than 1 to 2 million barrels. Mukhang ang epekto po nitong decision ng OPEC ay tanggalin po yung nakikinitang oversupply na yan na nagkukos ng tuloy-tuloy na rollback sa kadahilanan na ang reason naman ng pronouncement nila ay stabilize po ang price. Ibig sabihin, ayaw lang po nila talagang bumaba na. Ang price kasi ng crude oil ngayon nasa $90 per barrel. As of June, nung nakaraang buwan, nung taon na to, June, halos nasa $125 per barrel po yan. Ayaw na po na lang nila siguro na bumaba pa sa mga around 90. So ang target po talaga dyan, ang tinitingnan po ng mga analysts ay dapat, mukhang ang plano ay paakyatin po ng 100 to 110.
In other news, President Bongbong Marcos Jr. assured the public that he is closely monitoring Mayon Volcano's activity. In a Twitter post, the president said he is coordinating with the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, plus concerned local government units and amid the volcano's unrest. He said we continue to coordinate with FIVOX and the RRMC, LGUs, and other concerned government agencies to ensure the readiness to respond to the situation. The president also advised the public to stay safe and alert. Science and Technology Secretary Renato Solidum Jr. said that slight inflation of Mayon Volcano has been observed based on electronic tilt and GPS measurements and precise leveling survey indicating the continued slow ascent of magma to the surface, which prompted the upgrading of the alert level. The sighting of the dome led to the upgrading of Mayon Volcano's alert level from 0 to 1 on August 21. Now, FIVOX told the public to be vigilant and refrain from entering the 6-kilometer radius permanent danger zone to avoid risks from explosions, rockfall, and landslides. It's now on alert level 2. In case of ashfall events that may affect communities downwind of Mayon's crater, people should cover their nose and mouth with a damp clean cloth or dust mask. Aviation authorities were also urged to advise pilots to avoid flying close to the volcano summit, as ash from any sudden eruption can be hazardous to aircraft. In other news, Vietnamese fisherman Nguyen Van Loc has been attacked by Chinese Coast Guard vessels so many times that he has lost count. Now, one summer day in 2020, while sailing through the Paracel Islands resource-rich waters in the South China Sea claimed by both Hanoi and Beijing, his boat was rammed by a Chinese ship repeatedly until it capsized. 13 of his crewmen were left clinging to a fishing basket in the water, desperately awaiting help. Take a look.
Khi mà nó tới á, thì không có ai dám đi ra ngoài, có nghĩa là ở trong cái cabin hết, bởi vì sao đồ nó to rất là nhiều, búa hay là rìu với đá là nó to rất là nhiều, cho nên là không có dám đi ra ngoài, thì chỉ hé coi thôi. Rồi sau này nó tông rồi là cái chiếc mà tông rồi á là nó chạy thẳng về luôn, còn chiếc tàu là ở theo dưới cái chìm hay không, nó theo nó dưới một miết tới tối ra, thấy mình đi chạy vào mà đi chọt vào, đi nhó đi vào nó vẫn đi theo miết thì ra khỏi biên nó về.
Mày bay thì thầy anh bay nè, rồi bay 2 chiếc lên 3 chiếc lên nó bay ra xuống nè. Bay chứ thầy anh bay ra xuống. Ngay đấy cho anh bay đều đi, ngay muốn thì anh bay ra.
Chính vì vậy mà ngư dân chúng tôi là họ xác định khi họ vươn khơi bám biển trên 2 ngư trường truyền thống, dù có bị thiên tai, nhân tai hoặc bị tàu lạ cướp đi tính mạng và tài sản, thì họ cũng quyết tâm sống không thể thiếu Hoàng Sa, vì nơi đó có một phần xương máu của cha ông và đồng đội, và trong đó có những người con của đất Việt, họ đã ra đi bảo vệ chủ quyền.
Now, swathes of the disputed sea are no-go zones. And according to Licensed Fishing Association, nearly 100 Vietnamese boats have been destroyed by Chinese vessels since 2014. Beijing gained control of the Paracel Islands in 1974 after clashes with the South Vietnamese Navy that left 75 Vietnamese troops dead. Today, Chinese Coast Guard vessels shoot down the Vietnamese flags that flutter over the cabin of each fishing boat, according to Licensed Fishing Association, and mostly the crew have no choice but to sail away, fearful of the consequences if they stand their ground. Meanwhile, here in the country, Filipino fisherman Mariel Vilmonte had spent years plying the turquoise waters of Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea for snapper and grouper until a Chinese Coast Guard vessel water cannoned his boat. And that was in 2012, around the time China snatched control of the small ring of reefs from the Philippines, and he hasn't dared go back. Take a look.
Yung papunta kami ng Scarborough, hinarang kami ng 2 Chinese Coast Guard. Ngayon ang nangyari, nung pabalik na kami, binumba kami ng tubig sa loob ng mga 2 minuto. Hanggang na makaabot kami sa Lamang Malyahe, sinusundan pa rin kami. At nang hindi na kami makabalik sa Scarborough.
Nung wala pa yung mga Chinese Coast Guard dyan, sir, malaya kaming mangisda, labas at loob niyan. Pwede kami kung saan mamundo sa loob. Kung saan kami namumundo sa loob, doon namin iiwan yung motherboat, safe doon. Doon kami nangisda, labas at loob. Oo, marami pang isda yan. Noon, hindi pa kinalkal yung gitna niyan, hindi pa sinira. Parang na rin, sir. Para ka magnanakaw sa sarili mong bakuran. Ganun na lang. Parang pakiramdam mo. Parang yung lahat na kami doon na mangisda, ganun ang nasasabi namin. Para naman tayong nito, yung dumayo sa ibang bansa na samantalang atin ito. Tayo pang binabawalan.
Meanwhile, an analyst commented that China's claims extend as far as 1,000 nautical miles, which the analyst said was wildly inconsistent with the law. Let's listen in.
UNCLOS represents a grand compromise between the maritime powers, the US, the Soviets, the UK, and the developing world. And China was at the table. In fact, China had a privileged seat at the table. It had as much say in these rules as anybody. So what has changed is not that the rules have become unfair, but that China has become more powerful. And the rules that protected China as a developing coastal state now seem like an unfair constraint on a China that believes that it should be able to impose its will on its neighbors.
Meanwhile, another analyst said China's aggressive quest for control over the South China Sea is more about prestige than control of the resources. Let's listen in again.
Essentially, the Vietnamese and the Philippines have been dealing with Chinese incursions into their EEZ for the better part of maybe 40 years. We never experienced it until maybe 2013. That was when we first began to see Chinese Coast Guard ships enter our exclusive economic zone. Essentially what China wants in the South China Sea is for the other countries, the other littoral states, to acknowledge that China has a legitimate claim, that it has legitimate rights towards the oil and gas in the area and fisheries. It's more about prestige, more about a sense of that they have overcome the humiliations of the past, rather than actual access to those resources. Those resources don't matter as much to them. This myth, I think, that people in Malaysia believe about the relationship with China, that somehow China treats us differently, that somehow they are harsher towards the Vietnamese and towards the Philippines. But it's actually a matter of proximity, But for some reason, that has led to this funny delusion that in this country that somehow, okay, you know what? We are the favorite partner here, favorite little brother, basically.
In tonight's other news, the first minors convicted under Hong Kong's national security law were today sentenced to detention in a training center by a judge who said their calls to overthrow China's government must be met with deterrence. A 16-year-old girl and three 17-year-olds were members of a little-known pro-independence group that called itself Returning Valiant and promoted a violent uprising against China at street booths and on social media last year. The court heard they were charged with conspiracy to incite subversion under a sweeping national security law that Beijing imposed on the city to stamp out dissent after huge and sometimes violent democracy protests 3 years ago. Now on Saturday, Judge Kwok Wai-kin said the defendant's message could have turned peaceful demonstrators violent, even though he considered there was no direct evidence of anyone being incited. The 14s, which AFP has chosen not to name because of their age, all pleaded guilty last month alongside fellow defendant Kwok Man-hye, 19 years old. All five were sentenced to up to 3 years at a training center, a rehabilitation-focused detention facility, which can be a sentencing option for teens aged 14 to 20. President Marcos Jr. said he will take an active role in proposing measures to address conflicts in the region during the Leaders Summit of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in Cambodia next month. However, he also stressed that ASEAN must have a united front in addressing conflicts in the region. Take a look.
In my discussions with the different leaders, we spoke very much, of course, of the situation here in Southeast Asia, in Asia, in regards to the intensifying non-violent conflict, but push and pull between China and the United States over Taiwan. And again, we were reminded 2 days ago of what we may have forgotten a little bit, that North Korea remains a threat to the peace in the region. And it's my belief that we must strengthen our organizations, and specifically in this case, I'm talking about ASEAN. And I think ASEAN can do more than it has done thus far. And in fact, in the upcoming ASEAN conferences that are coming up in November, I intend to propose several actions that ASEAN can take specific to the different conflicts that we are seeing in our region. And if the Philippines can play a part, then that would certainly be a good thing. We have the issue of Myanmar and the Rohingya situation, and we have as yet been unable to bring Myanmar to the table. And I think it's time to put forward some concrete proposals on what we can do to, at the very least, bring the at least representatives of the military government to the table so we can begin to talk about these things. I'm a great believer in engagement. And I think once the lines of communications have closed, then any hope of a compromise has ended. And so let us continue with that. But again, we must present a united front, and that is something that I believe is the best way forward, simply because the moral suasion, at the very least, of several member countries of ASEAN is probably, in many ways, more effective than just a single country. Although we don't dismiss bilateral contacts, bilateral negotiations, multilateral negotiations outside of ASEAN, within ASEAN. Again, I think we should continue to try and push our member neighbors to present that united front and to move that united front forward so that we can say that ASEAN as a political, geopolitical aggregation, economic aggregation, has certainly shown that it has a function to do in the normal scheme of the geopolitics, but when crisis comes, that they come to the fore. And that again is something wherein I believe the Philippines can play a large part.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. May lalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Welcome back. Global food commodity prices fell last month, although the cost of cereals rose, linked to uncertainty over how long Black Sea ports will continue to stay open. In its latest World Food Commodity Prices update, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization noted that overall shopping basket prices fell for the 6th month in a row in September. Take a look.
The index fell in September for the 6th consecutive month, after an all-time high that was reached in March 2022. The decline in September was driven by another significant fall in the world prices of vegetable oils, together with moderate declines in those of sugar, meat, and dairy products. By contrast, the price sub-index for cereals increased in September. With this new decline in September, the food price index of FAO is down 14.6% from its peak in March. However, it still remains 5.5% above its value a year ago. This is in September 2021. First, lower world prices generally reflect better availability at the global level. However, it has not led to better food access for low-income countries. This is due to several factors, including the high cost of processing and transportation, logistics, and the depreciation of the currencies against the US dollar. Second, the recent decreases in world prices do not mean market stability. We are still subject to uncertainties and volatility, which relate to developments in the energy and fertilizer markets, to weather conditions, and to policy reactions, especially by exporting countries. Notwithstanding some declines, world prices of energy and gas remain high, reducing fertilizer affordability and increasing production costs, adding serious challenges to the production of 2022 and 2023, which is right now our major concern, given this could put at risk food availability in 2022-2023. What we had this year was a food access crisis, was not a food availability crisis, despite of the war in Ukraine. In terms of food access, still we have a problem because the poorest countries are still not being able to afford those commodities. For the 2022-2023 season, we have a serious concern because of the substantial increase in the price of fertilizers, because of the challenges we are seeing on rice market, which is not only affected by the fertilizer price increase, but also of what is happening in Pakistan, which is the fourth exporter of rice, India rice in the world. We have a concern still of food availability and food access for the next season, which is something that we need to look carefully and avoid. So I don't think we are out of the problem. And the decline that we observed today is different to the previous month in the sense that wheat prices are increasing and cereal prices in general have increased relative to what we observed in the previous 5 months.
And there are also signs today that the pain on the pump could worsen after the OPEC cartel and the additional group of 10 exporters led by Russia promised to cut production of oil. Now, President Joe Biden's administration is angry at ally Saudi Arabia for overseeing Wednesday's move by the OPEC to cut production by 2 million barrels a day in a bid to boost oil prices. Take a look.
I have to keep reminding our friends here, the clue for OPEC Plus success is first and foremost is our cohesion, and you could see it in front of you, which means you have to be proactive. It is a simple principle that we found ourselves deploying. That deployment had enabled us to maintain a sustainable oil market.
No, the trip was not essentially for oil. The trip was about the Middle East and about Israel and rationalization of position. But it is a disappointment, and it says that there are problems.
Are you worried about U.S.?
Every kitchen table cost is going to go up, not down. And I realize costs are going up on food, and I was able to bring gasoline down well over $1.60, but it's inching up because of what the Russians and the Saudis just did. I'm not finished with that yet.
The Biden administration has released record amounts of oil from U.S. strategic reserves this year to combat rising oil prices, taking Strategic Petroleum Reserve or SPR inventories down to a 40-year low. The U.S. has been lobbying to hold down fuel prices and isolate Russia over its Ukraine aggression. The European Union has also proposed introducing a price cap on Russian oil as part of new sanctions over Ukraine. Moscow on Wednesday said that a price cap on its oil would have a detrimental effect on global markets and warned it would not supply crude to countries that introduce it. While the actual drop will be about 1.2 million barrels a day due to the Saudi-led cartel's ongoing failure to hit production targets, the reduction is still a heavy blow to President Biden's efforts to rein in energy prices. Even if executed at a 60% level, the OPEC Plus cuts will push inventory draws into bullish territory. And that puts benchmark Brent crude on the path to reach $100 a barrel before the end of the year. The International Monetary Fund is downgrading its global economic growth forecast, according to the IMF Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva, announcing it today in a speech to students in Washington, D.C.'s Georgetown University campus. Take a look.
We will see, we always come around the annual meetings with our World Economic Outlook, that we are further downgrading our growth projections for next year. And we will be flagging that the risks of recession are rising. Our estimate is that 1/3 of countries around the world, this is the 1/3 share of the world economy, would experience at least 2 consecutive quarters of contraction this year and next year. And even in countries where growth is positive, for hundreds and millions of people, it would feel like recession because inflation is eating into real incomes. Overall, we expect global output as a result of all this to shrink between now and 2026 by $4 trillion. To give you a sense what is $4 trillion, this is the size of the German economy. Gone. Not tightening enough would cause inflation to become de-anchored and entrenched, so with us for a long time, and that would require interest rates to tighten even more to bring it down, and that would cause tremendous harm on people, but also on prospects for growth. On the other hand, if we tighten too much, too fast, and do so in synchronized manner, we can push many economies into prolonged recession. So far, we see a relatively good shift. Tightening is leading to taking somewhat the heat out of domestic demand, including in the housing markets. Of course, not good if you are on the market right now, but it means that we are slowing down the risk for the economy. But we are not there yet. Central banks have to continue to respond. In the current environment, as painful that may be, this is the right thing to do. Even if the economy slows down as a result. Not easy, not without pain, but less pain if we take a look into the future. Do the right thing now.
The IMF chief concluded her speech by urging countries to act together to address the deeper causes of the world's fragility, including uniting for change ahead of COP27. Meanwhile, the U.S. announced new export controls aimed at restricting China's ability to buy and manufacture high-end chips with military applications, stepping up tensions between the countries. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning on Saturday hit back at the chip export restrictions, accusing Washington of attempting to maliciously block and suppress Chinese businesses. Take a look.
美国出于维护科技霸权的需要，滥用出口管制措施，对中国企业进行恶意的封锁和打压。这种做法背离公平竞争原则，违反国际经贸规则，不仅损害中国企业的正当权益，也将影响美国企业的权益。
The rules announced by the U.S. Department of Commerce include export restrictions on some chips used in supercomputing and toughen requirements on the sale of semiconductor equipment. The aim is to prevent sensitive technologies with military applications from being acquired by China's military intelligence and security services, according to Commerce Department official Alan Esteves in a statement. The rules were announced just days after the Pentagon added 13 more Chinese firms, including drone manufacturer DJI and surveillance firm Zhejiang Dawan Technology, to a blacklist of Chinese military-linked companies. In other news, a rare pink diamond has sold in Hong Kong for nearly $58 million, setting a record for price per carat paid at auction for any diamond or gemstone. According to Sotheby's, the 11.15 carat Williamson pink star fetched $453.2 Hong Kong million, the second highest price paid at auction for any jewel. Pink diamonds, by the way, are the rarest of the precious gems and the most in demand on the global market. Take a look.
A beautiful stone. It's extremely rare to find a pink diamond, vivid pink diamond of this size. You have different degrees. So you have fancy light pink diamonds, you've got fancy pink diamonds, fancy intense pink diamonds, and then by far the most rares are the fancy vivid pink diamonds. And the color saturation of these stones is so much stronger and so difficult to find in nature. And then when you find a crystal of over 18 carats with that weight, with that color and a very good clarity, that's just really rare. That I wouldn't know where to find another one at this moment.
The winning bid by an undisclosed buyer from Boca Raton, Florida, was more than twice the estimated $21 million sale price. The stone was the second largest pink diamond to be sold at auction, while the Fortune Pink is the largest vivid pink pear-shaped diamond to go to auction. Larger cushion-shaped pink diamonds have previously gone under the hammer in 2018. Christie sold the 18.96-carat Winston Pink Legacy, which raked in over $50 million, the highest per carat price ever paid for a stone of its kind. And Google is looking up to its smartphone game with the Pixel 7, the latest entrant in a competitive corner of personal electronics where it has traditionally been a bit player. The device was unveiled this week in Brooklyn, where representatives from the Mountain View, California giant highlighted top-flight features that can silence background noise on the phone. Take a look.
To Tensor G2. When your phone understands your voice, it opens up so many more possibilities. Translating conversations with Live Translate, asking Google Assistant endless questions, navigating directly to apps without tapping, and easily sending messages. Take Assistant voice typing, which is, on average, 2.5 times faster than using a keyboard. On Pixel 7, Assistant voice typing will automatically suggest relevant emoji to insert, and it's much more forgiving now in case you don't know the exact name of the emoji you're looking for. So saying something like happy emoji gets you what you want, but that's an easy one. What about upside down face emoji? Or heart eyes cat emoji? Or woohoo emoji?
Now, the prior phone version, the Pixel 6, was the first to employ Tensor processing developed by Google to enable more sophisticated artificial intelligence and machine learning. The Pixel 7, meanwhile, has a second-generation Tensor, the G2, which can make blurry photos more clear, excise distracting extras from photos, and remove the background noise on telephone calls. The upgraded system also can translate language in real time, including idioms, and transmit more nuanced photos of different skin tones. Priced at $599 in the U.S., the Pixel 7 is being positioned as relatively affordable. The latest versions of the iPhone and Samsung Galaxy are both around $800. Google has been bolstering its Pixel marketing, partnering with the NBA Professional Basketball League. The company also plans to distribute Pixel 7 in 17 countries, compared to 13 markets for the prior version. A work at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., once thought to be by Vermeer, is now regarded as a fake. A new research shows that the girl with a flute is not from the hand of the Dutch master, although it was probably made in his studio. The painting had been donated as a Vermeer in 1942. Now, this downgrading follows a detailed study of the 6 paintings in Washington that at various times have been regarded as Vermeers. 3 now are confirmed as fully authentic: the woman holding a balance around 1664, a lady riding around 1665, and girl with the red hat at around 1669. 2 others have long been seen as forgeries made to deceive. Girl with the Flute is now regarded as a studio work. All the works are now going on display, accompanied by the results of recent scientific examinations. The exhibit, Vermeer's Secrets, runs at the National Gallery of Art from October 8 to January 8 next year. And as always, I'll end the week on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay alert, stay informed, because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.